Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Now I just got back from vacation and I've been struggling a little bit to make a video. Sometimes it's hard to get back into the swing of things. But I had one idea that I thought would be pretty cool, and that is making super colorful backgrounds with several different techniques and keeping the focal point bright white so it stands out. And by the way, everything I use in today's video is listed in links down below, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Now without further ado, let's get into it. For the first technique, I thought I would bring out the large stamping foam so we can create a really fun reverse impression with one of our dies. And for the die, we're bringing back the Candy Stripes cover plate because this one can be used for a lot more than just Christmas. All right, so I'll bring out the Candy Stripes cover plate, and with my cover plates, the edge die is separate on all of them, so I'm not gonna use that. I'm just gonna end up using the detail cover plate area, and then I'll place this down on my desk to make sure it's nice and ready to take the texture. And then I got my piece of large stamping foam, and when it comes to heating this up, I find that standing and getting my pressure into it really helps to get the best impression. So I'm gonna stand and heat this up for about 10 to 15 seconds. I like this Ranger heat tool because it's not as concentrated of heat, so it'll kind of evenly heat the surface across. And I'll just keep my heat tool moving to make sure everything gets good and hot and to make sure nothing gets burnt. All right, so once we got it ready, we wanna move really quickly, flip it over into our die, and then give it some good pressure all the way around to make sure this transfers. That is really cool. Okay, so lots of people get confused if you could use dyes or not, because some people think it's gonna cut the foam. It's not gonna cut the foam. You'll get a great impression, but you'll get these really thin lines, which show up pretty cool when you start inking it up. All right, so I thought some greens and blues would look great for this background. So we're gonna start off with Psych, which is this really bright greenish yellow color. And to ink up the stamping foam, I just go kind of in a swirling motion like this, because I find that tapping, you're not gonna get like the best coverage, right? Usually you wanna tap when you stamp on a normal stamp, but with this, I find you get the best coverage by swiping your ink across the surface. And then we'll move into the next color. I'm gonna use Viper here. And lots of people get a little bit worried about the ink transferring from one ink pad to another. For that, I would just say start off with the lightest color you wanna use. So I started off with Psych, and then move into the darker colors as well. And if you get a little bit of ink on your ink pad, you can always go in with a dry cloth afterwards and just wipe it off until the ink pad goes back to clean. Next, we're moving into Tropical Tango. I love this greenish teal color. Gonna swipe this ink onto the surface and blend it in with Viper. So it gives a different effect than some other objects you might usually be stamping with. Then I'll go in with No Diving, swipe this on to blend it together. And you know what, I'll add in one more color. Here I'm gonna use purple. I like this Crown Me color, and I think it'll go well with the blues and greens. So I'll swipe that onto the surface, and that looks just beautiful. I'm glad I added that purple. Then when it comes to stamping this, I always like to add a little bit of water to help it transfer better. So I'm just going to go from a little bit of a distance and lightly mist over top of the surface. You don't want any globs of water, just for it to glisten a little bit. That way it doesn't lose any of the detail, but it'll help it transfer nicely. I always line it up with the bottom first when it comes to using this large piece of stamping foam, and then I can give it some good pressure all the way around the surface to make sure that everything transfers really nicely. All right, and when we lift this off, check out that beautiful background that we get. And like I said, with the dyes, you get those thinner lines there, but it just gives so much great detail and texture. And you, of course, usually couldn't stamp with the dye like this, so it's really awesome. All right, then when it comes to cleaning off the stamping foam, I just spray it down with water, and my inks clean off really easily just by using the water. But if you need to, you can always try using a bit of stamp cleaner as well if your inks stain, but if they stain a little bit, it's totally fine. And even if it's stained, it shouldn't affect the way the stamping foam stamps the next time you use it. All right, now you can leave this image in here as long as you want to, but the moment you want to redo it and flatten it out again, all you need to do is go back in with your heat tool and then just slowly heat this up. And in about the same amount of time as you heated it earlier, it will kind of go back to normal. You can already see the design disappearing a little bit in there. It'll go nice and flat. All right, and how easy was that? It's completely flat again, and we can use it in any other image. Then if you've seen my videos before, you'll know this is something I love to do, but I always like to go in around the edges using the exact same colors and blend a little bit of that ink around. This just really helps to frame the card nicely, and it gives it a little bit of a vignette by darkening the edges. So you'll see it really creates a nice contrast there, and then keeping the center lighter, it'll draw your eyes to the center where your focal point will usually go. In card making, it's really all about these little details that you think you don't need to do, but if you do these little details, it really finishes off the card nicely. And in this case, it frames it out really beautifully for your focal point. And also in this case, I don't use any other colors. I just bring back in the same color, and when you layer up the same color over top of another, it just gets a little bit darker, and it really helps to create a nice, beautiful contrast in that background. So look how much that really brought the background to life. I love it. All right, you guys, for the focal point on this card, I'm using Brilliant Butterflies. This is one of my favorite dies from the Metamorphosis collection because there are so many butterflies in here and each one has its own shadow die. So there's a lot of versatility and it's a great value in this set. All right, so let me pick out the butterflies I want to use. I think this one's really pretty. And then I also want to use some of the smaller ones in here. So I'm going to grab out this little one. Maybe we'll put that guy in the center there. And then I'll use this medium-sized one up top here. So once I found them, I'm gonna find their little shadows as well, and we'll match them up to each of the butterflies. Okay, so I'm gonna cut out the detail layer in this white cardstock, but to make it stand out even more from the colorful background, I'm gonna use a piece of vellum for these shadow layers. All right, so I'll bring in my die cutting machine, we'll lay down the vellum, and then place all of the shadow dies right on top. And then we'll run those right through the die cutting machine. And those cut through the vellum super easily, just like butter. And then I'll place in a piece of my stark white cardstock and we'll lay down the detail butterflies onto our cardstock. And then again, we'll run these right through our die cutting machine. And I like to also run these right back through as well to make sure that all of those little details in the butterflies cut out. All right, then to get all these little pieces out of our cardstock, I'm going to take in my tool-in-one. I love this brush to get out all of these intricate little details out of my butterfly. And it helps to do it really quickly as well. All right, so I just rub this all over the surface. All right, so I'll just do that same thing to the other butterflies. They've honestly had this tool-in-one for a while, but I just recently rediscovered it when I came out with these super detailed dies and how easy it is to like get out all of these tiny pieces with the brush attachment. All right, and then I'll sort of plan these guys out like they're flying, and then I'm gonna go in using a little bit of this tape runner adhesive from ThermoWeb. I find tape runner kind of hides it better than liquid glue does because liquid glue kind of makes a puddle on the vellum. I don't like that. So tape runner, see? You can barely even see it there. I honestly can't even in person. So that's why I love using the tape runner on vellum. I highly recommend it. All right, then I'll adhere this last one up here. And then same thing with these detail butterflies, I'll just add a little bit of adhesive right to the center so that the wings can still pop up. And look at it, you can see how that vellum really blurs out the background super nicely and makes these butterflies stand out just beautifully on top of that colorful background. To finish it off with the sentiment, I want to use this Butterfly Kisses stamp set. It's got a bunch of great stamped images inside of it. I love this large floral, but then also some really great encouraging sentiments. And I think for this one, I want to use the sentiment that says spread your wings and fly. I think that's super encouraging. And then I think I'll give it a little contrast. So I'm gonna stamp this onto some black cardstock, starting off with my anti-static powder tool to make sure that none of the embossing sticks. Then I'll go in with some Versamark clear sticky ink to stamp it down, and the embossing powder will stick to this. So we'll stamp it down. And then lastly, I'll bring in my white heat embossing powder and sprinkle it right over the top, and then tap off any of the excess. And I also lightly blow on the surface as well, which helps get rid of any of the little excess powders. Then I'll heat set this until it's nice and bright white. And then to finish it off, I'm just gonna go in and fussy cut this sentiment out. And I'm using my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors so I can get into these little details, and I just leave a little bit of a border all the way around the sentiment and carefully go around it. It's super easy to do, but I feel like cutting it out instead of just leaving it on a rectangle cardstock helps to give the card a bit more of a finished look to it. And there we have our finished card. I really love how this looks with that super colorful background that we created using the candy stripes die and the stamping foam. It gives such a beautiful reverse impression. And then finishing it off with those super delicate and intricate butterflies gives it a really beautiful and sophisticated look. And I love how sweet and encouraging that sentiment is as well. I love to send encouraging sentiments like this one. For this next technique, I was inspired by something that I saw using my product line, which is always so awesome when I put those designs out into the world and I see the amazing things you guys and everyone else creates with them. So first off, I need some color down on my background here. So I'm using a piece of stark white cardstock, which is gonna be great for ink blending, and I've pulled in some yellows, pinks, and reds that are gonna blend together just beautifully. So I'm using my domed foam blending tools, which is gonna lay down a lot of super bright color at once as well. And I'll just blend some color onto the surface. I want a nice heavy layer of color. Next, I'll bring in Guppy and we'll overlap them, and you guys can see just how easy it is to blend using my inks. It was one of the main properties that I wanted to work really well when I made these. And so you can see it's like effortless to blend them together. Moving into one of my favorite colors is Prom Queen. It's this super bright and intense pink. And again, you want to overlap the colors quite a bit so that they create kind of new tones in between. And if you want to make a blend even better, you can go back and forth using the colors. So I'm going to add a little bit more orange here so we get that beautiful shade in between there. And then last, we'll bring in this super dark maroon color. I love Game Over, and I'm going to blend it into that pink at the bottom here. All right, I love how this background turned out. Like I said, super easy to get super vibrant colors and have them all blend together just beautifully. So for this, I want to lift off some of the color. So I'm using this outline background stamp. This one is called Kaleidoscope Flowers, and I absolutely love all of the details in these sort of floral images here. So I'm gonna flip this over onto my surface. I'm gonna move the background out of the way here, and then I'm going to spray down some water. And I'm going to lightly mist water over the top of this surface. And you want enough water to where you can kind of see it beading on the stamp there, but you don't want globs of water. Again, it just depends. If you add more water, you're gonna see less of the detail, and the less water you add, the more detail you'll see in the design. So then I can bring back in my background, and my ink is going to react with the water on the surface here. So flip over my inked background, place it right into my stamp design, and then you just want to give some light pressure to make sure that all of the areas touch the background there, and then transfer. And then when we lift this off, you'll see it's already starting to lift and react with the ink on the surface there. And then as it dries, it'll intensify even more. I'm a little bit impatient, so I'm gonna go in with my heat tool here, and you guys can really see the transformation. That as this water starts to dry, you'll see it sort of intensifies that bleaching effect and lifts off even more of that beautiful color. I love how this looks. And there is the finished background. I love that technique. It's a basic one that's been around forever, but it's so classic and gives such a beautiful, detailed result on your colorful inked backgrounds. So the technique that I saw was featured on the Spellbinders website. They created a beautiful card using my In Bloom die set. And what I thought was so cool about this is, of course, this is a layering flower. You've got 3 different layers in it. But what Spellbinders did is they just took one of the layers, this really small one right here, and created such a beautiful look with it. So I thought I would try it in today's video. And they also used this little tiny centerpiece as well. So I'll pull that out too. All right, so I'm going to lay both of these pieces down onto some stark white cardstock, and then we'll run this right through our die cutting machine. I want 5 of these flowers, so I just kind of keep puzzling them in there, and then again, running it right through. Okay, and then while we're doing our die cutting, I thought I would cut up the sentiment as well. I'm gonna use the hello sentiment from the Everyday Sentiment set. There's a bunch of words in here, but I thought hello would fit this nicely, and I'm just using the word without its shadow. All right, so I'll place this on my stark white cardstock, because again, white is gonna be kind of the focal point color on that super colorful background, and I'll cut this out about 3 times. All right, with the flowers, I'm gonna leave these guys white so they stand out, all right? But with these centers, I'm gonna kind of color block them as to how they'll be on the card. So the ones at the top, I'm gonna use Shooting Star, because Shooting Star is at the top of the background, and I'll just go in and dab on this color using my foam blending tools, and then just dab it right onto the die cuts. Super easy to do. For this middle one, it's gonna be right in between Guppy and Prom Queen. So I'm gonna start off by using Guppy and dab on this color. And then I'll also bring in Prom Queen, and we're just gonna overlap these colors just like how they are in the background to create a completely new and beautiful color in between. And then at the bottom, there's Game Over. So I'm gonna go in using this color and dab it onto the surface. And this is so helpful because like there's no cardstock that I have that matches Game Over perfectly. And so going in directly with the same ink pad that we used makes it really easy. Now when it comes to putting these together, you could of course layer them so that they're kind of in between and so that there's some little petals sticking out as well. But I thought I would just keep it simple with just the one layer. And then with this flower, it also doesn't really matter which side is facing upward. So I'm going to kind of rotate a couple of them so they look like different flowers and not all the same as well. Perfect, so it's gonna look something like this. All right, then all I need to do is go in with a little bit of liquid adhesive, add it to the center of these flowers. And then I can super easily grab my tweezers. These ones happen to be from Altenew. I love little detail tweezers because then I'm able to figure out the placement that I want exactly before I press them down onto the card. And again, I love the different colors that we were able to do. You really can't find cardstock that's a mix like this. I'm so glad that I saw that inspiration image from Spellbinders. I would have never thought to try this, but that's why it's so cool to see what other people do with stuff so you can get inspired in your own ways. And then I'm just going to pop these up on some foam tape and it just gives it a great amount of dimension. Then when it comes to the sentiment, I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid adhesive all over the back. And then I'll place the die cuts on top of each other. And then I go in with my fingers and I just give it little pinches all over the word die. And this just helps it to kind of line up exactly on top of each other. So if you have a hard time aligning the dies, just lightly pinch them together and you can see it aligns perfectly. And I'm just going to glue about 3 of them together to get a little bit of dimension behind the word dies. Place it on top and then pinch it together to make sure that everything lines up perfectly. Then I'll place that right into the open area, and that little space provided the perfect spot to spotlight a sentiment. And there is the finished card. I love this super bright and bold background with that little detail using the Kaleidoscope flowers background stamp to lift off the ink. And then of course finishing it off with those in bloom flowers. I love that we just used one of the layers. You don't always have to put everything together in order to get a beautiful effect. And so these little flowers together look just adorable. And again, I'll leave a link down below to the Spellbinders website where that project is. I think someone behind the scenes on our team made that project and they did such a phenomenal job. I was so inspired by it. For this next card, I'm gonna share a technique to get a really beautiful textured background with tons of color. For this, I'm gonna do some embossing using a die. So here I'm using the stained glass window die. This is a beautiful cover plate. And again, I'm not going to use the detail layer that comes along with it. To do embossing with dies, I'm using the universal plate system in my Spellbinders machine. We're going to use both A and B, the base and top plate. And then I'm going to go in with E, which is the rubber embossing mat. And this is what's going to help us get that embossed look. So place that down first, and then we're going to place our cardstock down. Today I'm using my stark white cardstock, and in order to get a really great clean impression and not have it crack, I'm going to go in and lightly mist this with water once or twice just to get the fibers in the cardstock softened, and it'll help us get a great result. So place that down on the surface, and then we'll use our die. We're gonna place it with the cutting side facing down, and I'm just going to line this up on the center of my stark white cardstock. And here's how this works. Because the cutting side is going into the rubber embossing mat, it's not going to fully cut, it's just going to squish that design down into there. So that's why we're using that rubber mat. And then we'll go in with the platform adapter plate, which is D, and we'll just place that right on top, and we'll run this right through. And check that out. You get such a beautiful textured and embossed background. None of this is cut out on the back at all, but you get such a beautiful impression, almost like an embossing photo would give you. So definitely try this technique with other dies in your collection. You could do it with all of them and get such beautiful impressions. Okay, now let's add color to the surface. For this, I used that same die without the edge, so you can cut it out of a rectangle of cardstock like this, and then you have all of those beautiful details from the stained glass window die, but you have them cut out. And this is going to act as a stencil that we can lay over top of our background. I'm going to tape this in place while we do our stenciling, so I'll just tape down our background using a little bit of mint tape, and this will just make sure that it doesn't move. And then we can place down our stencil on top that we cut out using the same die, and then hold it in place again using another layer of mint tape. There's also little segments on this die where you can kind of color them in rows. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take a little bit of my mint masking tape and cover up the first row that I want to color in. And for this, I'm gonna use a little bit of the no diving ink, go in with my foam blending tool, and then I'll just blend this right into the surface. And the really awesome part about using the same die cut as the stencil is it makes it so that we can just get those stained glass areas and not the rest of the background, which I think is awesome. So we can lift off that layer of mint tape then, and we've only got that one row. And then of course we can go back in, mask off this next area, and then we'll mask off up top too, so that we just get one of the rows of the design. And for this, I'm using Clear Skies, which is this super nice bright blue color, and we'll just blend it into that row of the design. Then we'll lift off the last row, and I just think that it's so cool. You can mask off the different sections of this and get such a beautiful stained glass look. Next, I'll bring in a little bit of Crown Me, which is this beautiful purple color, and again, just start blending over top of the surface in that little row that we've masked off. Peel this off. It's coming along really well. And also, I think you could use this top layer too, now that we've blended all this area on it. And then we'll go in and blend it in using a bit of Psych, which again is that really beautiful and bold lime green color. Lift that off the surface. And then we'll mask off that green color so that we can do this whole top section. For this, I'm starting off in the center by using a little bit of Shooting Star, and this looks kind of like a sunray design. So I'm gonna start off in the center with this bright yellow. Then I'll bring in a little bit of Guppy, which is this orange color. It'll blend really beautiful together with that yellow. And then lastly, we'll go on the outside using a little bit of Game Over and color in these edges and blend it together with Guppy. And then we can lift off our stencil and check that out. I think it's super cool that we have that great texture in the background and that we've also got each area individually colored in with inks. It's super cool to be able to use that die as a stencil and also to do techniques like embossing. To finish off this card, I'm using the Butterfly Kisses stamp set, and I want to use the floral image and also this butterfly that looks like it's landing on top of the flowers. I'll peel out the images that I want to use, And then I can ink up and stamp down the image using a little bit of VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, which is going to give us a really great crisp and jet black line. So I'll just flip this over. I'm using my large Simon Hurley Create acrylic block. And I'll just stamp down that flower. You can see you get a great crisp image with all of that detail. And then I'll do the same thing using that butterfly image and stamp it in the corner. And because this ink takes a little while to dry, I'm going to throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder to set the ink and also to make it nice and shiny so that it stays super jet black. Then I'll heat set this until it's nice and clear and shiny. Again, I want the focal point to mainly be white, so with these flowers I don't want them to have too much color, but I still want a little bit of color. So I'm going in with Over the Moon, which is a really soft yellow color. It's almost like a pastel color, and I'm just going to bring it into the center of this flower and lightly blend it out a little bit to the edges. I don't want too much color, so kind of keeping it dark in the center and then fade it out. And this just gives enough color to kind of bring the image to life, but not too much color where it's going to overpower, since I want the background to be the main focal point, and for this to be a nice accent. I do want the butterfly to stand out a little bit more, and to color this in, I'm going in using my Misty stamping tool. We'll place it down with my magnet, and this has a solid image that colors in the wings super easily. So I'll just line the image up over top of the stamped image, and then once it's lined up, we can go in and pick it up with our Misty door. Then I'm going to go in using Crown Me, which is that nice purple color. And again, I want this to stand out a little bit more, so I'll stamp it down using that nice purple. And then to add a little bit of shading to this, I'm going to go in using the exact same color and roll it on the edge, just coming from the inside edge there, and we'll stamp it down again. And I'm going to keep layering up the same color in that same spot to add some shading. And with these inks, they're translucent dye-based inks, so when you layer them up like this in the same spot, it's going to darken that area, so it gives some nice shading, even though we only used one ink pad. I love that tip. There's also a little image to color in the body, so I'll just line it up on the butterfly, pick it up, then I'll stamp it down using a little bit of shady, which is this nice grayish black ink color. I feel like the leaves are missing just a little bit of color. Again, I want to keep it mainly white, but I just want a little bit of color in there. So I'm using Viper, I'm going to tap off a little bit of the excess color, and then I'm going to go in using a detail blending tool and just add it to a little bit of the leaves. Again, I'm not going, too intense with this color. I'm just adding it at kind of the base of the leaves, and then I'll let it fade back out into the white color. These detail blending tools are a game changer for getting into little details like this and being able to color them in. Without these little tools, you would never be able to do coloring like these leaves. Now this stamp set has a coordinated die set that goes along with it, which I really love. It makes cutting out these images so much easier. So I'll pull out the two dies that we need to use. And then all you need to do is line up the die so that it has an even white border all the way around the edge. And then I can go in using a little bit of mint tape and adhere it down to hold that die in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. And what I love so much about this die set is that it even cuts out the little area in between the leaves too that I would never be able to get if I fussy cut this out. Change of plans, I don't like this on here at all. I think it's a little bit too busy for this background. So what I'm gonna do is turn this into a card, and then I'll take this and turn it into a card as well. So if you're not liking how it's turning out, don't be afraid to change course. For this card, I'm gonna go in using the Succulent stamp set. I thought that using some of these succulents, like placing them in this bottom corner, almost like it's in front of a stained glass window, would be kind of a fun idea. So I'm gonna pull out this one up here, and also this wider one down here. All right, so I'll ink this up, and then we'll stamp it down onto our stark white cardstock, and then we'll stamp it right down onto our cardstock. And then again, I'll throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder to help set this ink, and then heat set it till it's clear and shiny. There's some solid images in the Succulent stamp set to help color these guys in, but again, I want to keep the images rather white so that they help stand out from the colorful background. So I'm going to go in using some green colors, starting off using Viper, and again, just using these little detail blending tools. Just go in, tap on some color. I'm going to tap off some of the excess just so it's not super dark, and then I'll start at the bottom of the Succulent and then blend my way upwards. And again, once we get towards the top, I want to leave it pretty white. And then for the snake plant, I'm going to use a little bit of Later Gator. Again, tap off some of the excess ink on the side, and then we'll start at the bottom and sort of blend my way upward and fade it out to white. And again, if we want a little bit more color at the bottom, we can darken it up a little bit. I should just stop while I'm ahead, but I want to use a little bit of cookie dough too to add just a little bit of color down onto these faces. And the cookie dough color is super, super subtle. So I'm just going to add it to the corner and then blend it out a little bit. And it just makes these look like they're little terracotta faces. There's a die set for these guys as well, so we'll pull out the dies that we're using. And then we'll line them up with a nice white border and then place the coordinated die over top using some mint tape. And then I'll just run this right through my die cutting machine. All right, those cut out super easily, and so much for me coloring these white. They're pretty much colored in, but they still got quite a bit of white on the edges, so we're sort of following along with my theme. For the sentiment, I'm going to use a little bit of Versamark ink again, and I'm going to stamp down the Believe in Your Dreams sentiment onto some black cardstock. Again, I'll throw over a layer of white heat embossing powder to make this really stand out. Then we'll heat set this until it's nice and bright white. And then I'll just go in and fussy cut this out using my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors again. And I'm just gonna leave a little black border all the way around the sentiment. But like I said earlier, just cutting this out and making sure that we don't just leave it on a big rectangle just helps to give the card a more finished look, and it only takes a couple seconds. Okay, so this is the layout I wanna go with, and these images fit so much better on this. So for this back image, I'm going to use some tape runner to adhere it down flat onto the card, and then we'll just place this right down. And then for the front image, I want to add a little bit of foam tape to pop it up and make it seem like it's got a little bit more dimension and that it's closer. All right, so we'll overlap it and pop it up on some foam tape. So here's a closer look at that finished card. I love the beautiful background that we created using the stained glass window die by embossing it and then using it as a stencil to create all the different colors. And then finishing it off with the Succulent stamp set, I think finished it so nicely. It definitely works a lot better than the flower. So like I said, don't be afraid to change the pace halfway through if you don't love how things are turning out. All right, now let's finish off this flower card. I'm gonna do a little bit of masking, which I love to do using the mint tape. And here I'm using the 4-inch mint tape so I can mask off a larger area. But for this, I'm just going to mask off from one corner of the top folding card base to the other corner of the card base. And then this will allow us to blend half of the card base with color and leave half of it white. To keep along in this color scheme, I'm going to use yellow, red, pink, and purple as well. All right, for this, I'm starting off by using a little bit of Over the Moon, which is that same color that we used on the flower. Again, this is a nice kind of softer, buttery yellow kind of color, so it's not as intense as the Shooting Star. And then next I'll go in with Rosy Cheeks, which again is a more muted pink. It's not as bright and intense as Prom Queen is, so I want this background to not be super bright. And then again, we'll go back in using Over the Moon to sort of blend those together really nicely. And then last but not least, we'll blend in Triple Berry, which is this nice warm purple color. I love this color blend all together, and you can see just how beautifully it blends into that pink. Now again, let's create some texture by using a little bit of water. Here, instead of using a background stamp, I'm just going to mist it down with my water, and this is going to react and give us a really great kind of splotchy background wherever it reacts with the water that we sprayed down. And then I'll heat set this again to kind of speed along the drying process and also help intensify that color. You can see once we start drying it, it intensifies the bleaching effect and gives a really beautiful white resist. All right, and then I'll peel off the mint tape, and this is one thing I love about mint tape. It masks off so beautifully, and it doesn't rip your cardstock at all, so I'm never worried about it ripping, and we get such a crisp line. All right, so I've added down some foam tape onto the back of that flower, and then I want to make this kind of go along the line that we just masked off. So I'll kind of put it on that angle there and then adhere this down onto the card. And I love the composition of this with the flower on that angle and the masking right down that line. And then lastly, we'll pop down the butterfly onto that flower as well. All right, and I think I love this little sentiment. It's super tiny, it says never lose hope, and I think that's gonna be great in the white space of this card. So I'll ink it up. So I'll lightly ink this up. Again, it's so tiny, you don't wanna over ink it. And then I'll bring it right onto the card, and then again, stamp it down right into that open space. And here is a look at that finished card. Again, I love that simpler background that we created and how the design follows the flower really beautifully. And then finishing it off with the beautiful butterfly and that simple sentiment. I love how bold and graphic the masking on the card is, and I cannot wait to send out the sentiment to encourage someone. All right, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. There was a bunch of tips packed into all those cards and creating those super bright backgrounds and keeping the focal point whiter so it stands out. More than anything, I just had so much fun sitting down again and crafting with all of you guys. If you enjoyed the video, give it a big thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite. And also down there is a full supplies list to everything I used. And again, using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'll see you all soon. Bye!